everybody. My name is Tim Tibbetts and I'm the CEO and owner of Seagate Wines here in Freeport, Bahamas. Seagate Wines is a wine import and distribution company that goes out and searches the world for some of the best wines possible, and then we bring them into the Bahamas so that everybody can enjoy them. Over the next few weeks, what we would like to do is to help fill our time with the complete lockdown that we're in right now and complete quarantine, especially here in Grand Bahama, where we are forced to stay in our home for the next few weeks. We're going to help you guys out with a little bit of wine knowledge. We're going to teach you a little bit about where wine comes from, how it's made, and then how to taste, how to choose what you like, how to become a little bit more informed about your choices and where you actually get value from. So today we're going to start with what I like to call Wine 101, which is very, very simple. Where does wine come from and how is it made? So we're going to start off firstly by what makes wine different. So there's, as everyone knows, there's a ton of different wines out there. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of wines are made every year. But what makes each one of them different? And that's the factors of production. There's 6 different factors of production. The first one being grape varieties. So that's what grape are you choosing to use. So when you buy a plot of land and you want to become a vintner, you're going to pick what grapes you're going to grow in order to make specific kinds of wine. And obviously it can be any of the thousands and thousands of varieties of grapes that there are out there, obviously depending on where you're from, the country you live in, the climate and the soil that you have. So number 2 is going to be the climate. The climate is going to be a huge impact on where you choose to do your wine or what style of wine you make. And climate is different from weather. So climate is the consistent over the course of many, many years or, lifetimes, the style of climatic things that happen, the amounts of rainfall, the which direction, how many days of sunlight you get, the direction of the winds and how consistent the winds are. All of those things are climatic. But weather, which is the next step, weather is what happens on a daily, weekly, even annual or seasonal basis that will affect specific vintages. And the biggest ones obviously being frost that can kill your vines, heavy rain can cause a lot of rot, mildew, and disease. And at the end of the season, just before harvest, if you get 2 weeks of rain, you're gonna end up with a lot of water in the grapes and a completely tasteless wine. So those are the weather effects that will help, that will change the way wine works. Number 4 would be the soil types. And there's a lot of different soil types out there. Chalky, granite, gravel, alluvial, the different fertile versus poor soils. And usually when it comes to making good wines, the poorer the soil, the more flavor you're going to get out of the grapes, because the grapevine will struggle in poorer soil, concentrating all its effort and energy into the fruit itself. And then next comes the last 2 things. They sound similar, but they're very, very different. Viticulture and vinification. So viticulture is the actual growing of grapes. That's the tending of the vineyards themselves. The growth cycle, whether using a biodynamic cycle or not, prevention of pests and disease, whether you choose to do that naturally or whether you're using pesticides in the field, the pruning and the training of the vines. And you'll see a lot of this in really high-end vineyards. They will prune down entire clusters of grapes, just throw them on the ground in order to concentrate all the energy on 1 or 2 really good clusters rather than having vines full of grapes. Now, obviously in bulk wines and lower quality producers, they will use a lot more of the grapes and not worry too much about the actual quality of the grapes themselves. Now, when the grapes are picked and harvested and brought into the winery, then you have vinification. And the vinification is the actual process of making wine, which is pretty simple. It's sugar plus yeast equals alcohol plus carbon dioxide and heat. So it's a very simple equation, and I'll get a little bit more in depth with it in a minute. But there are also 3 different types of wines, basically, that we're going to deal with. Table wine or still wine, and that's your white, red, or rosé. And then you have sparkling wines, champagne, prosecco, sect, any of these type of wines that require a special cork and cage, or have bubbles inside the bottle. And then there's fortified wines, where alcohol is added to the wine after the fact in order to enhance it in some way, things like port. And that's basically your 6 factors of production. When it comes to grape varieties, there are thousands and thousands of grape varieties known currently being made into wine in the world. But the 6 main ones we call the noble grape varieties, and they're the grape varieties that pretty much everybody is going to know when you talk about them. There's Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Riesling, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Pinot Noir. And it's no secret why these are all French grapes. But you're also going to find all these grapes pretty much everywhere, not just in France, especially in the New World, places like California or New Zealand or Australia, South Africa, Chile. They're all using these same noble grape varieties, and even in mixture with some indigenous grape varieties, they'll still use noble grape varieties in the blends. But then you get into countries, old world countries like Italy and Spain, where they use much more of their indigenous grapes than they do the noble grapes. And we will also include Austria and Germany in this as well, because they have a lot of indigenous grapes that really define what their style of wine is. And we'll talk a lot about that because we have a lot of those wines in our portfolio. So we'll get to those a little bit later. So when you're making wine, it's very, very simple. Here's your process. First, you pick your grapes, harvesting usually between September and November, depending on the weather in the northern hemisphere. And then you'd obviously be the opposite in the southern hemisphere. First thing is harvest, then you crush them and destem them. And then you'll press them or use the free run juice that comes from whole cluster berries. And then you will ferment the must. So cooler temperatures for fermentation for white wines and warmer for red wines and the pressed reds. Now, red wines are also going to be using more than just juice. They're going to have the must as well. So the skins and all of these other things in order to add structure and body tannin and color. And that will help the red help to have both a longer life and more complexity in its flavors. The next step is fining. And fining is similar to filtration, but it's a little bit more of a natural thing where we add a substance that will draw the particles to it. Things like egg whites or milk powder, it's like a milk protein. And it's kind of like making a consommé. So if you've ever made a consommé in your kitchen, you will understand the concept of the raft on the top and slowly bringing it up to a temperature where it moves particles around, and then that raft traps the particles and clarifies the liquid. It's very much the same thing in fining. Nowadays, they don't use as many animal products in fining in order to make sure that their wines are vegan approved, because it helps to open up a much bigger market for them, and it really doesn't change the way that the wines look, taste, or feel. After fining will be racking, and that's where they put the wine away for a little while to let the sediment settle to the bottom. After racking would be filtration, and this is where we're going to try and remove sediment. Not all wines are going to be filtered, because natural wines tend to be a little bit more cloudy because they want them to be exactly as they intended them from their natural state. There's also a little difference in the cold filtration system because they're going to stabilize white wine in cold temperatures, just above freezing for a couple of days. And what it does is it creates potassium and tartaric acid crystals that bind to each other, and then they fall to the bottom of the tank and are removed with the sediment. Now in smaller, really cool, high-end boutique wines, you're probably going to end up with some of those crystals inside your white wine bottles when you put them in your fridge before you want to drink them, because they're not going to go through that extra step. And then the last thing would be maturation. So maturation is going to vary based on the style of wine you're making, the grape varieties you're choosing, whether you're white or red. So some whites and reds will be drank as early as 3 months after they've been finished. In like very, very early season, they'd be super fresh, really acidic, really bright. Wines like Beaujolais Nouveau for red is drank on the 3rd week of November after being harvested just in September. So very, very fresh and fruity, less depth of flavor. And then there are some wines that we have in our portfolio. For example, our Gran Resolte, the Gran Reserva from the Bodegas Resolte in Spain. The 2010 vintage is the current vintage out, and it came out last year. So you're looking at 8 years of maturation before they release the wine to the public. So it's very, very different depending on the style of wine, the quality of the wine, and what your actual final product is going to try and be. So now you have wine, you want to try and understand how to taste it. So in your mouth, you have the ability to taste 4 different flavors: acidity or sourness, sweet, bitter, and salt. That's it. But your nose has the ability to smell over 10,000 different smells. So in order to actually really analyze wines, you really have to learn to have your mouth and your nose work simultaneously to identify flavors that you recognize. It's really important that you practice this. You really need to practice with both of your senses, paying attention to flavors that you detect in the wine, learning what those combinations are, and then learning which ones you enjoy and which ones you don't enjoy, because that will help you when you're choosing wines in the future. The more flavors that you try in your day-to-day activities, and that's not just wine flavors, but food flavors, fruit flavors, anything that you can actually eat and taste, that's going to help give you a big background of taste knowledge or flavor memory that you'll be able to use when you try and figure out what particular wines taste like. There's a lot of different possibilities about matching wine with food, and we'll do a whole other topic on this, and I will have Rebecca probably do that one because she's much better at it than I am. And so just as a quick overview here, the things that will help you make those decisions are things like the season. What season is it? Where you are, your location. The occasion, is it a grand occasion or is it just every day? The company that you're with, and your budget is obviously going to make a decision in that as well. So those are your basic rules of how you come up with a plan for matching food and wine. Now, like I said, we're going to go into a lot of detail with all of these different things. And over the next few weeks, since we're locked down anyway and we have nothing else to do, we're going to try and make as many of these videos as we possibly can. A lot of tastings, a lot of tutorials will walk you through different regions, both in a broad term and a little bit more specific as we get into specific areas and wines that we want you to learn about. And I hope that you guys have the time to sit back, and we'll keep these on the website so that you can always come back and reference them. And if you're interested, you can always send us messages on the Facebook page, or you can email us at info@seagatewines.com, and we can answer any of the questions you'd like. And we can even email you the actual handouts that will go along with what it is that we're talking about. So I hope you guys all enjoy your time with us over the next few weeks, and I hope you learn a little something about wine and it helps make your wine experience a better one. So until next time, I'm Tim. I'll see you guys very shortly.